Robot Chicken is a show that I'm endlessly fascinated by. For those who live under a rock, it's a series that primarily uses a mixture of traditional handmade clay figures, as well as just normal store-bought toys to make a sketch show with a rotating cast of voice actors that lasted about 17 years. But apparently there's supposed to be a new season coming out soon. I'm not too sure. Even if you weren't allowed to watch Adult Swim like yours truly, the official re-uploads and fan-made compilations on YouTube have garnered millions and millions of views during that time period. And on the off chance that you didn't watch any of those either, you know the theme song. There's lots of unique parts to Robot Chicken, like a surprisingly large cast of original characters I had no fucking clue about, but outside of that, its appeal mostly comes from the same place that any other sketch show like SNL or the 2010 Mad series does, which are weird observations and or a twist on popular thing. SNL makes a sketch about Avatar using papyrus for its logo, the Robot Chicken makes a complete remake of Seven with the Smurfs. But I don't think that I need to point out with animation, the absurdity can be turned up to 11, and almost has to when it comes to sketch comedy, both in concept and execution. I don't think that it's controversial to say that what if Optimus Prime had terminal prostate cancer wouldn't really work with costumes from Rubies. Of course, not all of the jokes land. This is something you're just gonna have to get used to me saying from here on out. Sometimes the show veers a bit too far into the gross out humor, which was very prominent in that era. Or there's that one sketch of Hilary Duff starring in a 2005 reboot of The Diary of Anne Frank. Again, not gonna be everyone's thing. I'd argue that that's not a large amount of people's thing. But that aside, when you think about the process of making a stop motion anything, not that I would know anything about that, you realize that the team is essentially making fan fiction by playing with toys, which is pretty fucking rad. And this makes sense when you realize that many of the creatives behind Robot Chicken made the Twisted Toy Fair Theater. Yeah, you thought this was a Robot Chicken video, but it's not, so sorry. Quick rundown, Toy Fair magazine ran from 1997 up until 2011, and was not only solicitations and ads for new toys, which is probably what's going to be in a fucking toy magazine, but it functioned more like a community, complete with fan letters giving advice, AOL poll results, some beautiful toy photography, articles written on canceled toy lines like this Toy Biz one meant to tie in with the Children of the Atom game. Please get used to hearing the word toy a lot, as well as even interviews with project managers for major toy companies like Playmates or Toy Biz. And mind you, this is all in one issue, but in between some of those main draws for the magazine were comic strips made with toys. Some are little tiny gags you see in the front page, others are smaller ones at the bottom that go from page to page, but the biggest of which was the Twisted Mego Theater, named after the popular line of Mego dolls that are still used on Robot Chicken, but was eventually renamed to Twisted Toy Fair Theater, which gives off a major angry Nintendo nerd to angry video game nerd vibe to me. The whole concept behind Twisted Toy Fair Theater is, what if toy in funny situation? It's as simple as that. Like, what if a bunch of the Marvel superheroes barged into Dr. Doom's castle to throw a Halloween party, a la Bogey Lowenstein from 10 Things I Hate About You? The humor here still veers into the gross out category, like in that same issue, Hulk takes a shit in the pool. I really didn't need to know that, but maybe due to the restriction of a select variety of characters, as well as the comic panel format, allowed for the jokes to be a lot more observational and not as fast and snappy as you'd expect in animation, with there often being more than one joke happening at once. But the situations were still very mundane. Hell, the very first issue was, what if Dr. Doom went up against Red Skull on Jeopardy? It's actually really funny. Later issues even begin to parody real Marvel comic events, like their take on Secret Invasion, a story where a bunch of shape-shifting aliens begin to take over Earth by taking the place of well-known superheroes. Except in Toy Fair Theater, there was a miscommunication and all of them are Skrulls without any of them knowing, removing any sort of mystery to the story and robbing them of any sort of purpose whatsoever. And it even ends with Spider-Man almost making a deal with Mephisto to wipe everyone's mind in a reference to One More Day before making a deal with Doctor Strange for $20. Does it rely a lot on your pre-existing knowledge of Marvel Comics? Yes. But that's okay. Requiring a bit of context is okay every now and then, alright? These comics were made for a group of readers that's fit into a very specific spot on a Venn diagram, and thankfully 10-year-old me fit right in. And as much as I love these comics, being able to read them was a side effect of my uncle passing away. He passed away in the late 2000s, and to be honest, I didn't know him too well. I was really young, and so I don't remember too much about him, but I did know that he was in the Special Olympics, and he was a collector who was interested in a lot of the same things that I'm interested in now as an adult. Mainly video games, comic books, and action figures and magazines. He held his collection in a very high regard, and my family honored that for many years, but it was just not realistic to have to lug around totes and totes of stuff every single time you moved. So eventually it all had to be sold sometime in about 2011 or so. Me and a couple other cousins were able to salvage some stuff. Mainly I got some Ninja Turtle toys, both from the 80s series as well as the then recent 2003 incarnation, as well as a decent amount of old comics and magazines, many of which were Toy Fair issues that I'd read in my room all the time, which sparked not only this love that I have for old magazines and retro advertisements, but for weird comedic skits that you can make with toys. Nowadays, I only have a single comic issue that I was able to save for my personal comic collection, so I at least get to carry a part of him with me. I sort of get to make new memories and connections with my uncle through our kindred appreciation of the same stuff, despite never really having the opportunity to get to know him all that well. Considering how big Robot Chicken has become, it's weird how little Twisted Toy Fair Theater is brought up nowadays. So much so that I'll probably have to title this video Something Robot Chicken, when Twisted Toy Fair Theater should really be in the title. It's especially odd considering just how much of it was preserved outside of the magazine, since these were collected into trade paperbacks that are pretty dirt cheap. It's not an exaggeration to say that everything else really stems from this original comic, since there's a man named Alex Kropanak who made animations in 2008 based off of the sketches in the original Twisted Theater. The best of which is the Transformers one, but since these are all pretty short and needlessly undernoticed, I highly suggest that you watch all 4 of them for yourself. They're very well animated and even made me laugh about franchises I have no interest in, like Star Trek or Chips. However, just a couple years later, Kropanak will go on to write and direct for the stop-motion web series Marvel's Superheroes What The. What The was originally a comedy comic with twists on many Marvel characters in the 80s and 90s, but the 2009 stop-motion web series is more akin to the sketch show format, with entire episodes parodying stuff like Twilight with Morbius and Blade, as well as skits like, what if all the older Marvel characters had to live in an old folks' home? The only difference between this and what we've talked about before is that this is officially licensed. Because of that, 90% of the figures are official Marvel Legends you could buy both from Toy Biz as well as Hasbro as the series goes on, and the edgier parts of the subgenre had to be sanded off a bit. Curse words are bleeped, gross out humor is softer here, and there's no Anne Frank reboots, thank God. But the series is still hilarious. One of my favorite episodes is the Thriller parody with narration by Stan Lee. That's kinda cute. I love that the guest stars range from writers from Marvel Comics like Brian Michael Bendis to Andrew W.K. The show is kind of obsessed with MODOK, maybe due to how ridiculous his design is, and that's funny to me because Stupid Buddy Studios, who makes Robot Chicken, will go on to make their own ultra-violent stop-motion series about him, so that's an interesting case of parallel thinking. Culturally, What The is especially weird since it began right after the MCU got its start, back when the Fox X-Men films were still up and running, and Spider-Man 4 was freshly cancelled.
Spider-Man 4 was actually cancelled in January 2010. I am a dumb fucking cretin moron.
Hell, the second episode is an advertisement for X-Men Origins Wolverine, only to see this series run on long enough that it ended right before the release of Spider-Man Homecoming. To reiterate how long this series came out, the pilot is a stop-motion recreation of Christian Bale's on-set freakout for Terminator Salvation. Have we ever unpacked that as a society? It's already weird enough to lose your temper like that over being paid millions of dollars to play pretend, but even worse, it's for Terminator fucking Salvation. What The is legitimately hilarious, from the voice acting to the concepts like MODOK, pirating movies and that being on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s radar. That's just really funny to me. But where What The benefits the most is its set design and world building. At its core, it's still a comedy series, but I love how elaborate some of the sets could be. The background parody movie posters, the creativity of props and reuse of what were, already at that point in time, pretty old figures and accessories. Plus, seeing cardboard used in an officially licensed Marvel series just makes a lot of other animators breathe a sigh of relief. But while that series is amazing, it'd be hard to not mention other web shows that were clearly inspired by both Twisted Theater and Robot Chicken. Some of my favorites in the late 2000s on YouTube were the Apple parody I'm a Marvel and I'm a DC, as well as its spin-offs by It's Just Some Random Guy, as well as the one, the only, Superhero Mugs. If you've seen this 41 episode series, then you know just how funny and rewatchable it manages to be 15 years later. I see a ton of nostalgia for the LPS Popular series online, and this was sort of my equivalent. Mugs is a mixture of Toy Story along with Robot Chicken into a sitcom format. The first 2 episodes revolve solely around the trio of Captain America, Wolverine, and Spider-Man having arguments, until episode 3, which starts a 3-episode shonen arc surrounding symbiote Spider-Man. And from there, more villains and arcs would continue to be introduced until the final episode. Timeout, an elephant in the room. Again, this is a show from the late 2000s. Therefore, mentioning every yikes thing would be a big waste of my time. However, I do need to say that Spider-Man's character is mentally handicapped, and that's the entire joke. It's kind of funny when you're 10, awkward when you're a 20-something. Just figured I'd mention that. However, the writing here is legitimately well done. It's interesting to see how much of these versions of the characters take on a life of their own. Sure, Captain America is noble, Hulk is angry, and Wolverine is kind of an asshole, but from there, all of these become original characters meant to fit their respective roles of the sitcom cast. Episode 7 is one of my favorites, and it centers around Wolverine tricking his MySpace girlfriend into thinking that he's a real boy. It's so good. Wolverine sort of steals the entire show, and most of the episodes are about him getting his comeuppance in some way. No difference to the character like George Costanza or Chandler. Someone like Doctor Doom can't be a Latverian leader, so instead he's just kind of an annoying roommate. Changing people's music, giving out spoilers, commenting on Wolverine getting fat despite them all being made from the exact same mold, and earlier episodes explicitly stating that mugs can't eat anything. Thor is a pompous moron who tries to prove himself as the god of thunder by putting a fork into an electrical socket, and that ends about as well as you expect it to. It's an incredibly simple premise, and a lot of the episode ideas reflect that. The episode immediately following Thor's apparent suicide is all focused on an argument over a game of Halo 3. Damn. But much like other great episodic web shows, these characters and their small predicaments begin to resonate with you the same way that a live-action sitcom would. It may not be very deep, the animation might be minimal, but the show still holds a place in many people's hearts, including myself, so much so that fans are still clamoring for the feature-length finale still to this day. And all of that leads us to now, current day. Many of the creators behind these different projects have moved on to greener pastures, which is totally natural. But the problem is that there hasn't really been new things to take their place. There's not one magazine or any magazines or any really main outlet for us to rally behind. Don't get me wrong, there's many amazing animators out there like LoseS1, Leo Legendary, DGTX, Stop Motion Zach, and so many others. Some have even worked with Marvel themselves or even the major toy companies, which is always a good thing. It's nice to see such a niche form of animation be legitimized in that way. But for a myriad of pretty depressing reasons, all of these different projects have sort of fallen to the annals of the internet, only left there for those who remember them or anybody curious enough to rediscover them. And like I said, there's a few different reasons I can think of for why this is the way things are. Over the course of the 2000s, the internet changed from many independent websites to multi-billion-dollar businesses owning many of the 30-odd websites that we all use on a daily basis. The emphasis on both watch time as well as consistent uploads, especially on platforms like YouTube, completely screws over animators whose work tends to fall on the shorter side, since making anything over like 2 minutes takes way too long. I could keep rambling on the heat death of the internet, but if I'm being completely honest and even using my first-hand experience as someone who watched the times change over the past couple decades, I think the lack of any modern Twisted Theater analog has to do with the fact that, on some level, Stop motion still isn't given the respect that it deserves whatsoever. This is a very minor thing, but it's apparently a common stance to think that stop motion is creepy or weird. Now, obviously this is extremely subjective, and is something that many people grow out of. It also might have to do with what you're shown first. I think a child would be more open to stop motion if they were shown Fantastic Mr. Fox or Chicken Run instead of fucking Chainsaw Maid. Honestly, shouts out to Chainsaw Maid. But that opinion has always rubbed me the wrong way. It feels a bit like an overgeneralization that screams that you haven't experienced much of what the medium has to offer. This isn't even mentioning the little credit and admiration given to the actual animators. The Mid-Mare Before Christmas is still spoken about as a solely Tim Burton project, like Henry Selick is just chopped liver. Stop motion films are just thrown onto streaming services now, completely left to the behest of word of mouth. Like it's 1985. I've noticed that a lot more tedious art forms, but specifically stop motion, are spoken about in a very "I could never do that" way. That's one, extremely passive aggressive, and two, blatantly not true. You can make a niche comic or even a stop motion short film. Sure, you're probably not gonna make fucking Kubo and the Two Strings on your second outing, but that's not a very realistic goal. I could continue complaining about how the internet has changed for the worse in the past 7 odd years for hours and hours, but I should point out that the major upside of everyone and everything being on the internet is the ability to share anything instantly, including your homemade animations. Newcomers get to grow their skills by learning where to improve, implementing those skills into their own films, receiving immediate feedback, and repeating the process over and over and over again, naturally becoming a part of a community without even really realizing it. I've been interested in stop motion since I was 10 years old. I'd play with my Transformers and Avatar toys in the backyard with a camcorder and record my voice over it in post, because I didn't really know how stop motion worked entirely just yet. But unfortunately, all of those films and those toys were lost in a big move after I left high school, which wouldn't really be a huge issue if I had posted any of them, but I didn't. Mainly because I was embarrassed. It's weird to admit online, but people laughed at me when I was excited about getting toys as a kid. I remember in 5th grade, I got a Buzz Lightyear from the Toy Story 3 toy line, which was one of my favorite lines to collect for as a kid. I got that for Christmas, and let's just say when I told my friends, they were a little too happy at the idea. And something that we don't talk about with teasing or bullying or whatever the fuck you want to call it, is that follows you home. In this place you're supposed to feel completely safe. I still felt constantly perceived, even when I was like alone in my room, and that led me to ignore my passion for this art form, and even stunt my potential growth for almost 13 years. Even when I did eventually muster the courage to make a stop motion in 8th grade with a bunch of my Transformers from the Age of Extinction toy line, and my uncle told me that it was great. He watched it, he said, "Oh man, this is great." I didn't believe him, and I deleted it later that week. I wanted to do animation because I saw what can happen when a bunch of different groups of adults decided to make something because they thought it was funny, and frankly, because they liked playing with toys. Hopefully there's some kid or adult out there watching these newer animations and getting inspired to make their very own at home. Hopefully they won't be stopped by their fear of rejection or whatever, because that's what it's all about.
And now, the movie's new action figures collection. Fully posable. You can get them all. Spider-Man. Each sold separately.
Hello, everyone. I'm the mayor, and this is Miss Bellum, and we're hosting this week's Cartoon Fridays.
Now it's time for a brand new Mike, Lou, and Og.
Right here.